It's just a science project.
Silent breed is people!
A doctor friend once said the same thing to me. Frankenstein was his name.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
That sounds like something out of science fiction.
Please explain to me the scientific nature of the whammy.
We live in a spaceship, dear.
So? Yes, science!
Program complete. Enter when ready.
Hello and welcome to episode 229 of Science on Top for Sunday the 5th of June 2016. I'm Ed Brown and today I'm joined by Penny Dumsday.
Hello.
Lucas Randall.
Hello.
And a clinical trials coordinator in radiation oncology, Joe Benhamu. Welcome back.
Hi, Ed. Hi, everyone.
And coming up, we talk about a vaccine against all cancers, a giant sea sponge, how to stop the sexual transmission of Zika virus with condoms, and a link between mobile phones and cancer. Stick around for that one, especially if you or a loved one is a rodent. But first, Joe, we've talked a lot on this show about the success of vaccination. Thanks to vaccines, we've eradicated smallpox, we've almost wiped out polio, and we've greatly reduced measles, tetanus, diphtheria, so many others. And this week, in a paper published in the journal Nature, researchers from the Johannes Gutenberg University describe the development of a potential universal cancer vaccine. And Joe, I've become... it's almost a reflex now that I call BS whenever I hear of something that can cure all cancer or prevent cancer. It's like the thought of a universal cancer vaccine throws up so many red flags to me. Is there actually anything in this?
Well, I think there might be. I mean, I've got to admit, I was a bit miffed when I saw the title of this and read the article, because I might have to change the title of my "There will never be a single cure for cancer" talk.
That's not one of the good reasons to be disappointed, actually. It doesn't really work. But
well, look, I mean, as I think I've mentioned on previous shows, and I think some of your other guests have mentioned as well, immunotherapy is probably the most exciting area of oncology at the moment in terms of the potential for new treatments. And certainly what these researchers have done looks like it has some potential, but the reality is that it's so early on in what they're doing to really be able to declare that a universal cancer vaccine has been found. What they've done here is they've used what they've described as nanoscale, and of course it's nano, so excitement, nanoscale poison darts with RNA payloads. And what this does is induces a specific anti-tumor immune response. So like with all immunotherapy, it's harnessing the body's immune system to attack the cancer cells. Now, the study that they're reporting on was done in mice, but they also have done early studies in 3 humans. And there seems to have been a promising response in the 3 humans, but the study itself was not done to actually test effectiveness. The aim of this was really only to just test the safety of the vaccine. So really, to be able to actually make any conclusions about, how useful this could be as a treatment would require, really large numbers in phase 1, phase 2 studies, and then, really take it from there and see, first of all, is this effective across all cancers? Is it effective in only a selected group? What are the things about the different cancer subtypes that, it may be useful in and not in others? So, like with everything in oncology, I think, you've got to be really, really cautious about jumping in and saying that it's going to be a cure-all. So, I think in this case, they used melanoma, and melanoma has proven to be a particularly good target for immunotherapy, but maybe it won't be so useful in others. So I think time will tell.
I've only tested it against one type of cancer.
Look, from what I can see, they in humans, certainly they only, I think, tested it. I read 2 different articles about this, and in one they said that it was melanoma, but in another one, I think they said that they tested it against 3 different tumor types, but I'm not sure whether they were actually talking about a single tumor type that had metastasized to 3 different tumor sites. And that could be, another added, it's kind of adding in a lot of different variables there. They said that in one patient, a suspected tumor on a lymph node got smaller after they were given the vaccine, and another patient whose tumors had been surgically removed was cancer-free 7 months after vaccination. The third patient had 8 tumors that had spread from the initial skin cancer into their lungs. So it does sound like, yes, they were all, it was all melanoma that had metastasized to different sites.
Right. So when one kind of cancer metastasizes to another site, it still behaves like that original type of cancer. It doesn't become lung cancer all of a sudden, or does it?
No. Well, no. It's just no. So it's just that where it's located, it behaves like that type of cancer, but in the particular area that it's metastasized to.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
So prostate cancer, if it metastasizes to the lungs, acts like lung cancer sort of thing, does it?
No. The opposite of what I said. So prostate cancer, okay. Yes. So prostate cancer that's metastasized to the lungs behaves like prostate cancer and is prostate cancer. It's prostate cancer cells.
Right. So presumably treatments that you would normally use against lung cancer, you would have to use a treatment that you'd actually use against prostate cancer for that metastasized cancer.
Yeah. So if a prostate cancer has metastasized into the lungs, you would use a treatment that is specific to metastatic prostate cancer.
Gotcha.
And for a lung cancer, you would use a different type of treatment depending on the type of lung cancer. You can get what they call small cell lung cancers. It can really vary.
Yeah. So it's a bit of a stretch then to call this a universal cancer vaccine.
Well, I think they're seeing that there's certainly the potential for it to become universal. In that the specific, if they're able to harness the immune system in the way they're describing, then it has the potential to be universal. But that remains to be seen. They haven't done the work to actually show that it has that ability.
Yeah. But it's very, very early stages now. So.
Oh, very much so. In fact, I'm quite amazed that they were even able to do, early tests in humans already. But the fact that they can means that obviously they've been able to demonstrate some level of safety. The difference being, of course, in oncology that phase 1 trials in oncology are not the same as phase 1 trials in, say, other areas where, in a lot of clinical trials, phase 1 clinical trials are often done in healthy participants, whereas in oncology, in phase 1 trials, you're usually testing these treatments in patients who actually have the disease that you're trying to test it on. Because you wouldn't go giving chemotherapy to a healthy person, for example.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I feel like we talked about this or a very similar vaccine not long ago.
Yeah, we did. I think the last time I was on.
Again. So obviously that's the avenue that a lot of researchers have decided to go down, looking at ways of getting the body to fight the cancer itself.
Look, absolutely. And when you think about it, in terms of the sort of the armament, if you look at the armament that's been developed over the years, starting with the first chemotherapy in, the early part of the last century and radiotherapy, and then looking at, different types of biologics, which are, again, these what we call more sort of precision treatments that are targeted towards the specific tumor subtypes, where we've been able to look at, what are the genetics of a particular cancer? How does this particular type of cancer behave in one person versus another person if it's got a different genetic subtype? There've been huge developments, and immunotherapy, I guess, is particularly interesting because, if you look at, for example, radiotherapy is a localized treatment. So, it's not able to treat the whole body. So, if you've still got the potential for cells having metastasized, and you've already treated the local area, that radiotherapy is not going to be able to treat the cells that have escaped from that area and have lodged somewhere else in the body. Chemotherapy is designed to do that. But, the point with chemotherapy is that, the majority of chemotherapy drugs do have quite unpleasant side effects, although more recently developed drugs, have been less toxic in terms of the side effects that patients experience. And I guess one of the things that they're hopeful about with a lot of these immunotherapies is that they'll be free of a lot of side effects. But again, that's to be demonstrated with testing.
Sure, of course, yeah. It also strikes me as a kind of a new use of the word vaccine. I mean, I'm used to vaccines against viruses or bacteria where we know the cause of the disease, whereas we don't really know what's causing cancer as such.
Yeah, that's true.
It's a different sort of way of looking at it, I think.
Yeah, especially also because, normally, as you said, we know the cause of the disease, but also normally we give a vaccine before a disease has eventuated. But, it's a preventative vaccine, whereas these vaccines are actually treatments rather than designed to protect against a disease.
Yeah.
And I imagine that there may be a time when, that they'll look at, although actually, what am I talking about? The HPV vaccine. There you go. There's a vaccine that actually, is preventative for cancer and
That's
a large
true,
number
but
of
we know
cancers.
the biological agent that's causing it. It's the HPV.
Yes, very
virus.
much so. Very much so.
Just
exactly.
said HPV virus. You can't do that, can you? It's like an ATM machine.
Yes, pin number.
All right. Well, let's hope they get bigger trials and can make some more progress on that. It's very interesting. Now, Penny, 2.1 kilometres below the surface of the sea, scientists from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, have found a giant sponge. It is the largest on record. And it could be one of the oldest living creatures in the world, right?
Yeah, so apparently it's the size of a minivan, and it could be up to 2,000 years old, which I think
Is
it's
very
more
old.
one of the oldest animals. I think there's plants that hit 5,000, and I was reading a thing about like millions and millions and millions of year-old bacteria, but I thought, I won't touch that till Shane gets back. So, yeah. Anyway, but back to the sponge. Yeah, so it's a really old colony of animals. It's living way down in the bottom of the ocean, and I'm really impressed by the way that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration is really publicising the Oceanus Explorers mission, because this story popped up everywhere, like literally everywhere on the internet, this great big sponge, and it's still being referenced and people are still talking about it like, why don't we get the sponge to rule us, seeing as it's been alive for 2,000 years and we're doing such a terrible job.
No, I'm sorry. The age of something is not necessarily a good reason to give it all power. But anyway.
But what's fascinating is that, is it just that it can survive to such, because anywhere that's not that deep and not that remote, it's probably not going to be a great environment for a sponge. I mean, it's a very slow-growing organism. It's easy to eat, easy, fragile and brittle. So just being so deep and, not competing with a whole lot of other stuff is a really, just as something that we just don't know what's going on there. Like, we'd like to think we know about the deep ocean or the ocean, but a lot of what we know is so shallow. So I'm just, look, there's nothing, I guess, truly noteworthy in some ways about it. But it just caught my fascination for reasons that I can't fully explain.
I think it's interesting because, when you think about how do you measure something's age, sponges don't have growth rings or anything like a tree. Do you know how they were able to estimate that it's 2,000 years old?
I think based on growth rate.
Just the size.
Yeah, because sponges are also, like, each little sponge cell is a lot more autonomous than any of our cells. So they don't really have they don't really have organs. They're almost like this colony of tiny, tiny cells that are semi-independent but also seem to work together sometimes in strange ways. When you think of an animal, you don't really think of a sponge, but they are little animals, or animals.
Yeah. The Washington Post says that they have an obligatory disclaimer to point out that sponges are not plants, they're actually animals.
Yeah.
But I think also this story is kind of cool because for something to grow so slowly and for so long, it needs a fairly stable environment. This isn't an environment that's had rapid temperature changes or significant acidity changes or anything like that. And I think that's pretty remarkable in itself, that there's this pocket of the ocean that's remained so stable for 2,000 years.
Clearly there are no anglerfish swimming around chomping on them.
Yeah.
Well, no natural predators from the looks of it, because it's still there. I wonder what else that it has to battle and survive. Very cool. Now, Lucas, if any of our listeners are readers of the Wall Street Journal, then this week they might have seen the headline, "Cellphone Cancer Link Found in Government Study." I also saw another headline somewhere that said, "Cell phone radiation linked to cancer in major rat study," which made me wonder why no one ever studies the minor rats. It's always a major rat study. Does no one care for the lower ranks? But anyway, tell us about this study and why we should all throw our phones away after listening to this podcast, of course.
Oh man, this
it's a story that never dies.
Yeah, no, it just goes round and round and round. So, okay. We've been using mobile phones for a long time now. You know, we've got really, I guess, realistically over 20 years, going on 30 years of highly saturated mobile phone usage, be it over several different radio frequencies, because they've changed a number of times in Australia as different technologies have come out. But you know, we do have quite a long period of time now to have seen effects, if there are any. I'll come to this story in a second because I just want to sort of lay some ground information first. Mm-hmm. The suggestion that mobile phone radio waves or radiation would cause cancer is predicated on the assumption that the radiation emitted from mobile phones is sufficiently powerful to cause changes to DNA. So it requires that it's of a particular type of radiation. We call it ionizing radiation, and it requires that it's of a power that's high enough to cause that. That's the biological part of it. We need that to be the case, and neither of those things are true. The amount of power that mobile phones emit is actually very, very small compared to other emitters that you can be exposed to. I spent time in the Army Reserve working with the radios in the signal corps, and we had transmitters that were, you know, off the charts more powerful than mobile phones. Mobile phones are designed for point-to-point communication between where you are and a cell phone tower, which is never really far away. The other thing about mobile phones is they only transmit at full power when you're actually using them for a phone call or for data. So they're not always on. So coming to this story. The story was about a study which it was kind of one of these sneaky studies that was released by an indirect method. It didn't go through the normal publishing via a scientific journal. It was published by a particular service, an online service, I believe, that's not been, certainly hasn't got a high reputation amongst scientific journals. Not saying it's got a bad one, I'm just saying it's not a hugely well-known one. And it didn't go through the typical peer review. It has, according to the authors, received some peer review, but that's been quite limited. And the reason for that is the study itself isn't finished, and it's not due to be published until 2017. So what's actually been released is kind of a snippet of their findings, almost like a summary of
interim analysis,
early findings. Yeah. So there's a lot of sort of background to that and to why that they've gone that route, but there's already some alarm bells, you know, that crop up as a result of where this has gone. The study itself, according to the authors, revealed that in what was actually quite a large rat study, in terms of not large rats, but a large number of rats.
Major rats.
They may have been large as well, I'm not sure. But there certainly was a very large sample size in this, and they were broken down into various groups to deal with various types of radiation at various powers. They exposed rats in utero and through birth and up to a certain period of their life to frequent, ongoing radiation in various bands, frequency bands that are used by mobile phones for up to about 9 hours a day. And there were different groups of these rats, and they were broken up, and I won't go into details of how they did all that, but there basically were a whole lot of different groups of rats. There was also control groups of rats. Now, we know from historical studies that control groups, actually, I'll come back to that. So they had the control groups and they had these other studies. And what they did find was that there were two specific types of cancer which were indicated in male rats in some of the GSM bands and CDMA bands of radiation that they were exposed to. So these are different types of frequencies. So what they found was there were two types of cancer. One was a malignant glioma. Is that how you say it, Joe?
Glioma.
And the other one was a cardiac schwannomas, which are two very different types of cancer. In fact, one of them is it's almost like a precancer, if you like. It's a typically a non-malignant nerve sheath tumor. So the incidence of these was basically equalised to about 3% of the males that were in the study of some of the particular groups that were exposed to radiation. So that's okay, 3%. That sounds like something that's worth checking out. What's interesting was the control group actually had none of these types of cancers. So, on the face of it, you would go, well, okay, there's clearly something going on here. There's something worth looking into a little bit more. But what is odd is that we know from historical studies, which is what I almost said before, that typically your control groups would hover around the 2% mark for these types of cancers. So the fact that the controls had none was actually very irregular. The other thing that was very strange was that the study also showed, rather bizarrely, that the rats who were exposed to radiation also lived, on average, 8% longer than the control group. Which
even though some of them got cancer.
Right, which could have resulted in the hysterical stories, mobile phones make you live longer. But of course it didn't.
But it's actually funny. It's actually funny because there is evidence that low-grade exposure to radiation can have a protective effect.
Really?
Over a lifetime.
Well, I guess when radiotherapy is one of the ways that we kill cancer, I guess it stands to reason that it might have a small preventative.
Yeah, I can't remember I honestly can't remember the details, but I know that there's definitely been some talk that it's like a very, very low grade background radiation level can have a protective effect, but I don't remember the mechanism or But
we've also got to remember that we're talking here about non-ionizing.
Yeah. No, I know, and really, it's just a humorous aside.
Yeah. So anyway, these are the two main points that were brought up by the study. That some of the groups that were exposed to particular types of radiation had a 3% incidence of one or the other of these cancers, and that the control group had none. However, control group normally has about 2 plus or minus a very wide margin, actually 0 to 8% margin. So really, this is kind of statistically insignificant in that respect.
Right. But there was a 3% increase with a 0 to 8% margin of error.
Well, that's on the control normally.
Okay.
So the control group would normally have around 2% incidence of these cancers with a 0 to 8% margin. So, it's quite a large margin anyway. That's 0 to 8% on the 2%, just to be clear. So it doesn't mean that they could be up to 8%, but you get the idea. So anyway, it's a non-story at the moment because they have a preliminary result that they've reported on that hasn't been systematically peer-reviewed, and the authors actually include, apparently, because I haven't been able to get a hold of the study itself, but from what I've read, the authors have actually pointed out issues that the internal peer reviewers, when I say internal, the ones that they selected to peer review, have actually raised with the methodology and the results. So they've already acknowledged that these are problems, and it's been released in that way with this acknowledgement, but of course the media jumps on it and reports, that's it, we knew it, cell phones give you cancer.
Yeah. But even as we keep saying, you need a bit of reproduction as well. This has not been replicated. It hasn't even been finished.
Correct.
But already the headlines are going out there saying, whoa, watch out, there's a problem.
And you know what? Because this started filling the Facebook feed, it started cropping up all over Twitter and the usual sort of places that you see things throughout the week a couple of weeks ago. And initially I had my typical irritation that, for God's sake, I bet this is all bollocks. And then, reading into it tonight and yesterday when I sort of delved a little deeper and I went on to Science-Based Medicine and had a look on their response to it, which is typically quite detailed and reasonable. And, it starts to sort of they pick it apart at the seams, and there's quite a lot of good coverage on there, mainly by David Gorski and Steve Novella on that site. But look, it's my initial response was annoyance, and then I started to think, you know what? Maybe if a whole lot of people buy into this and just stop using mobile phones, maybe there'll be less crap on the social medias. You know what I mean? Maybe
there will still be crap.
But it was interesting to see in the one article about this where they talked about, obviously there was a spike in people conducting searches on this topic at the time that this was released. But it was interesting to look at the fact that, as they mentioned, there's a consistency to the number of searches looking at, cell phones and cancer over the last 12 months. And they were saying that, obviously this is something that's on people's minds. And I guess what it takes me to is the needless anxiety that's created by these stories, is that it's actually causing people worry, particularly around their kids, that parental fear around the fact that their children are going to be harmed, whether it was by cell phone, electricity towers or cell phone radiation. And it's just this ongoing assault on people with that they can, with nonsense that they can just that can be so easily avoided. But I suppose also, as we know, it goes down to a level of scientific literacy being helpful. But I think that's really troubling that it consistently gets mishandled.
Yeah, and this I guess is exactly the reason why we and certainly many other science communicators are so harsh when responding to media coverage for things, because the fundamental fact of things is most people don't have high science literacy, and they're not equipped with the necessary skills to assess these sorts of claims and to assess good evidence from bad evidence. They don't know where the best sources are to source information that's rationally put together based on facts, not on emotion and not on gut reaction and so forth. I mean, it'd be very easy to write a blog post blasting this study and saying it's all bullshit. But the thing is, the sources that we rely on are people who investigate this very, very methodically, and they're typically experts in their field. So we've learned that over time through various means, but most people don't, and that's why media coverage is so damn important for these things, and it's terrible.
And it's not just that they don't, they don't particularly kind of, understand the details of this, but it's that, I think even for people like us, as you said, for science communicators, we consistently underestimate just how poor, when we talk about a lack of scientific literacy, and I see it in my work as well when I talk about health literacy, it is astonishingly poor. The most basic concepts that people do not understand. And, I don't know, I can't remember whether I'd mentioned this on the previous show that I was on. I think it's actually been since then, but there's just been a new National Patient Information Sheet and Consent Form that's been released. And it's a really useful document. Over the last, 30 years or so, the way that consent forms or patient information sheets and consent forms for clinical trials and research are written have exploded with information, a lot of it driven by anxiety from researchers around not communicating things to patients. And so we find that we are filling these documents with so much information that I'm sure that patients become, hugely overwhelmed. Now, historically, these documents were written for an 11-year-old reading level. Now, this new consent form that's been written has been written for an 8-year-old reading level.
Wow.
And I think that really speaks to how poor people's health literacy is, and it's why I keep hammering this home to people who who bang on about how people can just go off and read a journal article, go on to Google Scholar and find out the evidence, and it is absolutely absurd to expect people to do this when the people who are actually responsible for communicating this information are failing to do their job, to then expect the people on the other end to be able to tease out, and be able to understand it.
I agree entirely, and that's the thing. It's a fundamental fact of society that most people don't have this skill set, and this is why the coverage is so important. And to your point about the people who for whom it's their job to communicate this stuff, I guess to some extent you have to question their motivation as well. Because if their motivation is to get coverage, then you know what I mean. You can certainly imply, and you can you can omit certain details that might then cause media to run with it and trump it up. So, what is their motivation? If their motivation is to communicate a study to help them achieve more funding, then maybe it is. And I'm not suggesting that is the case, but it does. I certainly wonder that.
It's on all of us, really. It's on the people doing the research. It's on the people reporting it. It's on science communicators like us to talk about it. But it's on everyday people who read it and listen it to talk about it. And if you're listening to our show, you're probably of the more educated and the more scientifically literate demographic. So it's up to us to then start talking to other people who might not be in that demographic and explain to them why studies like this are so overhyped and not worth paying attention to.
And I think in doing that, it's not just about, vomiting information at a person. It's about also, really asking them what they understand. Saying to them, do you know what this term means? Before I assume that you do, because a person may not even ask because they may feel embarrassed to, or they may just not think to, and I think it's really important to actually really think about those sorts of things when you're communicating information to people. I don't know
about you guys, but I hold back most of the time now because I've been through the period of my life of trying to make people see reason, and it doesn't work.
It's so exasperating.
That's how you lose friends.
No.
It's just, you know what I mean? And by friends, I mean casual acquaintances, but most people don't want to know.
No, well, in fact, what I found, it's funny you raised that because I've just this evening, I've just handed in an essay for the course that I'm doing. And in doing that, I did a lot of reading, first of all, around oxytocin. Thank you, Ed Yong.
Ed gets a lot of time on this show.
I know. But one of the things that, I was looking at in this essay was around how we reason about morality. But specifically, it looked at things like, some of the evidence these days is very much around the fact that moral reasoning is a social event. It's something that happens both, internally and between people. And everything we've spoken about in the past around, for example, a person who's deciding to vaccinate or not to vaccinate, we've said for a long time that people are so heavily influenced by their family members and friends over, say, the facts. So much of this stuff is really proving to be the case. And the assumption that you can simply just hand those facts to people and that they will be reasoned into it is just not the case. And I think in understanding that, it really, I guess, equips us to be able to go in there knowing that, if I go and speak to my friend and say, my friend who's considering not vaccinating their child or who, is worried that their mobile phone is going to give them cancer, if I go in there and say, well, this study said da-da-da-da-da, they're not going to respond to that. They respond to the emotional aspects. And those are the things that one really needs to engage with in trying to get them to think about their feelings about a topic and to really, you're not going to reason them into it. You can get them to connect with it emotionally, and that will drag them along the way towards reason.
All right. Well, we've been on this for a while, so we should move on. But just before we do, can you give us some quick tips on how people should do that? How should we approach someone else who's saying, oh, look, I'm not going to give my kid a mobile phone because they cause cancer? What's the best approach then to you look at that?
Well, funnily enough, it's actually something that Dave Hawkes does a lot. Dave, who's been on the show before, he's actually really perfected the art, I think, of how one approaches this topic. And I think the first thing is to say to them, what are you worried about? What are the things that you are feeling scared are going to happen? And getting them to actually express their anxieties is a really good starting point for the conversation. Not poo-pooing their anxieties, not saying, oh, no, don't be ridiculous, you don't have to worry about that. Actually getting them to say, these are the things I'm fearful about. And then, if they've got if they're worried about their child and you have a child or you have nieces or nephews and so on, you can engage with them on that level. And, you can talk about the fact that, well, I worry a lot about my my children, and it's sort of engaging on that common ground and those things that you both have connections to. I think that that's a really good way of opening up a conversation around those kinds of fears. And the thing is also, you're not going to do it necessarily in that one conversation. It can be a process of going back and being really, really patient and, just planting that seed and then helping them along the way to kind of start. It's really about also getting them to start thinking about it themselves and letting them reason through it in their own time, away from perhaps the sort of the more, I guess, emotionally charged conversation.
You never convince anyone in one conversation either. As you say, it's that by osmosis.
No.
You mentioned Dave. By the way, congratulations, Dave.
Congratulations, Dave, on your newborn.
Yes,
baby.
Congratulations, Dave.
Very good news. So there you go. We've all got some homework there. Go out and get the conversation started when you hear someone talking about mobile phones and cancer, or vaccines and autism, or climate change. But make sure you know what you're talking about when you do. Don't get half-cocked. I've learned from my experience that only embarrasses you when you don't actually know what you're talking about. And speaking of the media getting it wrong again, which definitely seems to be a common theme for us these days, but Penny, isn't it great that our plucky Aussie athletes are going to be protected from the Zika virus by special anti-Zika condoms when they go to Rio?
I know, how thoughtful of the whoever organises the Olympic team to give these special anti-Zika condoms, because everyone's worried by Zika, but these condoms will do the trick.
Yeah.
And I actually remember reading this I read this on a website that didn't actually really go into a lot of detail about these anti-Zika condoms, just saying that, this is the thing that's happening. And people in the comments were quite, read the article in good faith, quite earnestly like, oh, maybe there's like a special kind of latex, or the Zika virus has a weird shape and it can, thinking like, what could it be?
Well, they say they're coated with Viva Gel active ingredient, which is presumably some kind of antiviral.
Active ingredient? What are you meant to eat these condoms?
That's what it says on the packet of the Answer Lifestyles Dual Protect condoms.
And the thing is that all condoms protect against the Zika virus. So
the sexual transmission of it.
Yeah, well, I should have said the sexual transmission of it, which is, I think it's only been known to happen a couple of times. Anyway, I'm not up to date with my Zika. Not planning to go to South America.
Not even to support our plucky
Aussie athletes. Oh, yeah. Look, I sort of would love to go to South America one day, but yeah, anyway. I'm lucky to go to South Australia. Anyway, so it turns out that as long as this special antimicrobial gel doesn't actually affect the reliableness of the condom, which it could, like adding extra things to condoms sometimes does, they're going to be just as good as any other condom at preventing sexual transmission of Zika. So why was this a story? Why did this come out? And it seems
there was a press release and it's got condoms in it.
Yeah, so a marketing stunt by Star Pharma and Ansell, that they've got these special condoms and it protects against Zika. And look, part of me was like, maybe it's actually kind of a clever bit of health promotion. Like, people might get a bit slack about condom use, but everyone's alert for Zika. So, this is a special Zika. Well, I'll definitely use it all the time, But really, I think it's just marketing, and it's kind of sad that it became a story because people didn't fact check, or apparently didn't fact check,
Yeah. Well, it's purely a sensationalism thing. It's, look, we've got a story about condoms and athletes, sex and athletes. That's going to sell. Yeah. Let's make a study about it. Let's publish an article about it.
And the gel, like the effectiveness of that gel, apparently hasn't been tested. Like, it's been tested in a petri dish, well, you know what I mean.
Yeah,
a metaphorical,
not an actual,
but not in actual humans.
Yeah,
and I'm always reminded of that thing that lemon juice kills the AIDS virus HIV in a petri dish, and I'm like, well, great. Anyway.
Yeah, according to The Verge, which has got a really good write-up about this, A representative named Rebecca Wilson from Star Pharma said that they have concluded a preclinical study that shows that that it is potent antiviral activity against Zika virus in lab studies. It's a preclinical study. What does that even mean?
Yeah. Okay, I was like, is preclinical a thing? Anyway.
Clinical isn't even a thing if every cosmetic product you have is clinically tested, which doesn't mean anything.
I assume they mean they've just tested it in the lab. They haven't actually tested its effectiveness in a proper
clinical trial.
Yeah. I was really upset about this because, what they said about that, women in Brazil. So I don't know if anyone saw this, but I might have even mentioned this previously, but there was a really distressing documentary about the impact of the Zika virus in Brazil on, women who have been, who are left looking after these some of them quite severely disabled babies. And, the fact that women in Brazil have trouble accessing abortion services and hormonal contraception. So they were saying that, anything that could lead them to question whether they can trust, because apparently the government are distributing these free condoms.
Oh, so that could be the opposite of what I was thinking. Like it'll encourage people to use the condoms, but then it might discourage people.
So the government are distributing free condoms in Brazil, and so if they then think that these free condoms are not trustworthy, then they may not use them.
Oh, wow.
Oh, God.
So it has potential to really cause a lot of harm, and that's where it's like this whole, great, they get their marketing out of it, but never mind the vulnerable population who they affect with their stupid marketing campaign.
But is it? I mean, okay, so obviously the claims are absurd, but they're not wrong in certainly the bit about this condom prevents Zika. Yes, other ones do.
Well, all condoms do.
Yeah, I mean, it's not wrong. It's not false that this condom, protects you against sexually transmission of Zika virus. It's
no,
kind
this
of,
condom.
It reminds me
this
of
condom would still. This condom would still work. It's that they're saying that because I would assume that people in Brazil are not necessarily going to have access to this specific condom.
Exactly, and it's probably more expensive. And if you go around telling people that this more expensive condom will protect you from Zika, and people don't fully realise that all condoms are going to have the same protective effect.
Yeah.
They
just may choose not to use anything
at all.
Yeah,
but that's the thing, though. It reminds me very much of Nurofen, period pain, Nurofen tension headache, Nurofen migraine, same freaking product. You pick up the box, you read the actual active ingredients, and it's exactly the same dosage. But one of them, the period pain one's like 20% more because they're women, they can pay more.
Because it's for women.
Yeah. So And there's no difference because women earn
a lot more, so we can afford
to. It's why your razor blades cost more. It's why everything, shampoo and everything costs more, isn't it?
Well, pink dye is really expensive, so they have to up the price. So
everything's pink for women. Teal. Teal or pink.
Complaining about the state of pink dye and how expensive it is. It's absurd. It's sexism.
Oh, no, you meant
that was the sarcasm.
Right, no, I missed that. Poor Phil. Phil with his pink hair will.
Sorry, I forgot to hashtag sarcasm.
All right. I don't know where to go from there. So
what happened?
We'll wrap it up.
That was a smooth segue.
We'll have all the links to the stories we talked about today at scienceontop.com/229, where you'll also find our social media links, and you can leave a comment there as well. And you can email us feedback@scienceontop.com or leave a review on iTunes. Jo Benhamu, always wonderful to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you. It's been lovely as always.
Have you got anything you want to plug, or where can people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter at Jo Benhamu. I have nothing to plug.
What have you been doing? Anyway.
I'm studying this at the moment, so I have nothing going on.
In fact, the audience may want to know, what are you studying at the moment?
I'm doing a Masters of Bioethics.
Bioethics.
And I'm absolutely loving it.
Very good. And of course, thank you, Penny and Lucas.
Thanks, Ed.
Thank you.
This episode was edited with wisdom and passion by Marcos Benhamu. And thank you everyone for listening. We'll be back again next week, putting science on top of the agenda. Join us then.
But here's what Charles Beard, the insect-borne disease expert, said, and I hope this will wake people up to global warming, that there are so many ways it can get you. He said, with rising temperatures, you're speeding up the whole reproductive cycle of the mosquitoes. You get larger populations with more generations, and also, by the way, they go farther north.
Right.
They're in Florida now, but they're going to be in Washington, D.C. with the rest of the bloodsuckers. You get it?
You know what else you have? There are many sort of parasitic vectors that are tamped down in their population over the winter months because in the cold they don't reproduce or they don't. And so if the winters are milder, then their population as you enter the spring begins at a higher level and can create far more devastation than would have otherwise been the case. Now, it's not a problem unless they're carrying some virus that is lethal.
But that's what they do.
Right.
They carry